Hello, Dankey Kang gang. It's Comrade Dankey here with another exciting look into the world of Venezuela, the world that the Western media is spreading all kinds of lies about, and just to sort of clear up some of those lies spread by the Western imperialist media, Comrade Dankey is going to take a look into an Empire file, a transcript of a little video called An Ocean of Lies on Venezuela. Abby Martin and UN reporter expose coup. So this was February 25th, 2019. And it says, on the eve of another U.S. war for oil, Abby Martin debunks the most repeated myths about Venezuela and uncovers how U.S. sanctions and crimes against humanity with UN investigator and human rights reporter Alfred DeZayas. Keep Empire Files independent and ad-free. Transcript and link. So this is a transcript, folks. For the last few weeks, the world's focus has been on Venezuela as Trump pushes for regime change. Almost every media outlet paints the same picture, that Venezuela is a brutal dictatorship and a starving nation, one that demands attention. And that they finally have a solution to the crisis, a legitimate claim to power by an opposition politician, Juan Guaido. Despite the faux dissent against Trump's domestic policies, corporate media has lined up to support his coup in Venezuela. Gotta zoom in a little bit. Tech giants like Facebook and Twitter doing their part to shape the narrative too, recently removing 2,000 accounts for spreading pro-Maduro messaging. Ooh, how... so much for the free speech left. So much for the free speech right. Just so much for free speech in general. To quote, influence people. Oh no, because we can't have other sides of the argument, talking shit about the Western imperialist narrative. So media blackout, folks, in other words. Social media blackout. Trump has said a military option is on the table, with coup leader Juan Guaido suggesting he will request it. Alright guys, so for those of you who don't know anything about US history, we've done a fuck ton of nation building and regime change and all kinds of nasty shit in Central and South America over the past 100 years or so, starting with the Monroe Doctrine and continuing with the foreign policy of the Trump administration. So it's a real horrible thing. Says the latest cynical stunt is weaponizing aid to hold Maduro's government hostage. In the latest war escalation, the U.S. announced the delivery of so-called aid via military aircraft to the border. From Iraq to Libya to Venezuela, what usually preempts U.S. military intervention is the pretext of a humanitarian crisis. And right now, pretty much everyone speaks with authority about the fact that there is a humanitarian crisis caused by the Maduro government. We hear it everywhere, folks. We heard it on David Pakman. What is surprisingly absent from the discourse is the testimony from the human rights investigator designated by the UN to assess said crisis, Alfred DeZayas. He was the first UN investigator to go to Venezuela in 21 years. He's written 13 reports to the UN Human Rights Council, but his report on Venezuela was largely ignored, folks. They just ignore it if it doesn't suit their imperialist agenda. It says, I spoke with Alfred to find out why. This coup is painted as legitimate by the media and political establishment because of the international support from major U.S. allies in Europe and Latin America. But let's take a quick look at the world to see what that support really looks like. As usual, the African continent is erased from the dialogue. There, 51 countries recognize Maduro. Alright, 51 fucking countries. Only one, Morocco, recognizes Guaido. Then there's Asia and Oceania, where again only Australia recognizes Guaido. Only Australia. The other 33 nations recognize Maduro. Moving on to the Middle East, where staunch U.S. ally Israel is the only country to recognize Guaido as the legitimate leader, the rest in the region continue to support Maduro's presidency. Next, in the Americas and the Caribbean. Despite 17 countries across the continent recognizing Guaido, 19 countries still support Maduro. While the majority of U.S. allied Latin American powers back Guaido, in the Caribbean, the Bahamas is the only nation to do so. Lastly, Europe. Powers like France, Britain, Germany have united behind the U.S. to support their puppet in Venezuela. Even so, stark opposition to this coup exists within Europe, including Italy, Greece, Norway, Switzerland, and the Vatican. So by international community, what they really just mean is a minority led by the white imperialist and colonizer nations, erasing non-white nations as members of the international community. The corporate media has dutifully parroted the Pentagon line, the guy who 80% of Venezuelans have never heard of before was a legitimate leader seeking to restore democracy. So, who is Juan Guaido? A lucky 35-year-old man, just anointed king. You know, it's almost like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, folks. It's like he opened up that Wonka bar and had the golden ticket inside. He's like, "Ooh, I get to be king of Venezuela now. Thank you, U.S." Says that well before this coup attempt, Guaido was much better known in the elite U.S. circles than he was in his home country of Venezuela. He received a graduate's degree from a prestigious D.C. University, George Washington, where he studied under former IMF director as well as attended private business school in Caracas. So yeah, former IMF director protege. I'm sure he doesn't have a bias at all. Guaido's roots are in the militant wing of the opposition as an organizer in the violent street protests known as the Guarimbas. Channeling energy from those protests, he founded right-wing opposition party Popular Will alongside opposition leader Leopold Lopez. Lopez has been martyred as a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International and is painted as a hero across the Western media, allegedly banished for opposing the regime. In reality, he's on mere house arrest. He's on mere house arrest for leading violent street insurrections that left dozens dead. He was also part of the U.S.-backed coup in 2002. Okay, so everybody. Okay, David Pacman. Everybody, all these fucking so-called progressives are going around saying that Maduro is some kind of a fucking dictator. If he's a dictator, why would he let a guy who literally did street violence and tried to do a coup, why would he let him live, let alone not exile him from the country, let alone just keep him under house arrest? Like, what the fuck? Oh yeah, and Juan Guaido is, alive and well, walking around Venezuela, campaigning, doing his bullshit. So, if it really was an authoritarian country, don't you think he would have been clipped by now too? Did Hitler, let opposing Communist Party members walk around Berlin talking shit about him? I don't think so, ladies and gentlemen. Both are deeply connected to U.S. regime change front groups like USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy. By 2010, international agencies were generously pouring up to $50 million per year into funding the Venezuelan opposition movement. $50 million, folks. Oh yeah, sure, an organic grassroots movement. Organic and grassroots, my ass. This was a manufactured opposition, folks, by the U.S. Imperialist machine. With Lopez out of commission, Guaido has been groomed to replace him. Guaido even admitted that there's not a single thing he does without Lopez's guidance. So Guaido is literally like the stoogie of the guy who did street violence and tried to overthrow the government in 2002. Great job. According to the Wall Street Journal, Guaido's declaration as president was planned by Lopez and just 3 other opposition leaders, 2 of whom are not even in Venezuela, and came as a complete surprise to the rest of his coalition. Even Guaido was reportedly hesitant to make the move, and it was the phone call from Mike Pence, the day before that gave him the reassurance he needed. So this dip ass didn't even know if he wanted the prize after all. But Mike Pence was like, "No, you're gonna become the fucking president of Venezuela whether you want to or not, buddy." It says, as the White House official explained to the Washington Post, we have been engaged with the same strategy to build international pressure, help organize the internal opposition, and push for a peaceful restoration of democracy. Yeah, tell that to the people of Chile. Tell that to the people of Nicaragua. Tell that to the people of like all the countries you've done regime change in, buddy. It's never a fucking peaceful restoration of democracy. Stupid assholes. But that internal piece was missing. Guaido was the piece we needed for our strategy to be coherent and complete. Oh my god, ladies and gentlemen, Guaido was their ace in the hole. Guido was their ace in the hole. Just amazing. The CIA never manages to and the just the Washington and apparatus in general just never fails to amaze me at how arrogant they can be. These people, these foreign-backed elite assholes come in. They're like, "Oh yeah, I'm the president now. Sounds good, doesn't it, guys?" No, nobody likes you, dude. Go away. Go sit in the corner and think about what you did. It says, sound like a pretty open and shut case of U.S. CIA regime change plot. All the rhetoric is about the restoration of democracy, so let's look at that claim. Nothing about it's true. Let's look at the facts conveniently left out. First of all, Maduro did not replace the Supreme Court with his own supporters. The terms of 13 Supreme Court justices were up in 2015. According to the Venezuelan Constitution, it's the job of the National Assembly to approve new judges. So that's what they did. They're just doing what they're supposed to do according to their constitution, guys. So, fuck off. So that's what they did. The outgoing National Assembly approved judges aligned with their interests, which is exactly what happens in this country. Reference to the U.S. I don't remember anybody calling for a regime change when we appointed Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. So, don't fucking bitch and moan about the National Assembly approving judges aligned with their interests. Like, duh, what were they supposed to do? Empower the opposition? Like, just because out of the goodness of their hearts? What kind of liberal bullshit is that? Fuck off. It says, second, Maduro did not strip the National Assembly of its power. The opposition took over a majority of the National Assembly in 2016. For the first time since Chavismo took power in 1999, the opposition finally had some political power. So, you'd think they would use it to push all their solutions to the crises they're always talking about. But, instead, the jig was up, ladies and gentlemen. They used the National Assembly as a tool of sabotage to make Venezuela's problems even worse. But while they weren't punished for that, they ended up being in contempt of court, as Alfred de Zayas explained. So it says, now we get to the Constituent Assembly, widely condemned as a strangely termed self-coup. It was in Venezuela during the run-up to the Constituent Assembly election. I was in Venezuela during the run-up to the Constituent Assembly election. It was widely considered as a call for peaceful dialogue with the country's opposition. And it was completely legal. Article 347 of the Constitution allows for the creation of the Constituent Assembly. So here's the truth, folks. It was absolutely not stacked with Maduro supporters. It was a huge democratic process in which all citizens were eligible to run. Yeah, it sounds like a real, authoritarian hellhole over here, folks. Not only not only was the opposition eligible to run, the opposition was eligible to run, Jesus Christ, folks, but highly encouraged by the government to do so. Over 8 million Venezuelans participated in the election of these delegates. But here we go. The opposition called for a boycott of the election, and some factions even responded with violence. at least 2 Chavista candidates were assassinated by opposition militants. We don't hear jack shit about that in the Western media. We don't hear anything about how there was an election held and boycotted by the opposition and 2 Chavista candidates were assassinated. And it said on election day, around 200 polling places were violently attacked to intimidate voters, leading to around 10 deaths. So yeah, this is the pro-democracy opposition, folks, literally refusing to participate in the democratic process and intimidating voters. Yeah, Guaido in the opposition, real pro-democrat, real pro-democracy there. Who do you think is gonna buy this shit? Nobody fucking buys this. Well, I guess people do buy it. David Pakman buys it. It's unfortunate that people do buy it, but it's, I'm trying to spread the good word, folks. It's a bunch of bullshit. It says, yes, the Constituent Assembly is now full of socialists, but only because they were the only ones who participated and were democratically elected by millions. Okay, they were elected by millions. It says whether or not you agree with all these actions, one thing is irrefutable. They're all legal according to the Constitution written, developed, and voted on by the entire Venezuelan population. I'm not saying you have to like the Socialist Party. I'm just saying you should respect their Constitution. The basis of Guaido's legitimacy is that there's no democracy. Therefore, the sitting president is illegitimate. The funny thing is, the opposition officials making that case got their seats in office through the same election system that they say has always been rigged. So every election is stolen except when they win. It's wow, what a bunch of babies. The fact is, Venezuela's voting system has more checks and verifications than most countries. A system of voter cards, fingerprints, and more make fraud near impossible. Every vote can be audited and verified, as they often are. The elections are also heavily monitored by independent international observers. Surprisingly, it was the opposition who asked the UN not to send observers to the 2018 election, which could prove alleged voter fraud. Okay, so they just insist that the elections were fraudulent. But you don't have to investigate it, guys. Don't worry. We know. Just trust us. Believe me. Believe me, folks. The opposition could have actually won that election, but instead, those idiots, they boycotted it. Nobody should run and nobody should vote. When opposition leader Henry Falcone disrupted the plan and filed his candidacy, the MUD opposition coalition expelled him. And the White House threatened to sanction him if he didn't drop out. So they know it's a fucking dog and pony show. Like this whole opposition towards or this whole refusal to participate in the elections. It's all just so they can claim the elections were fraudulent. Hey, dip ass, if you don't run, you don't have any chance of winning. So, great job, big brain boys. You probably actually could have, won some seats, but you fucked up. You decided to just go the old US imperialism route. Great job, guys. In the end, Maduro won with 62 million votes, which is 31% of eligible voters. That's the same percentage won by Barack Obama in the 2008 election. Alright, so if you call Maduro's election illegitimate, might as well call Barack Obama's illegitimate. So, fuck off, Western imperialist media, with your bullshit accusations. Not only that, but the elections were verified by 4 different international organizations with observers from over a dozen countries. One of those observers is the former Spanish Prime Minister Jose Luis Rodriguez Zapatero, who said, I do not have any doubt about the voting process. It is an advanced automated voting system. Hell, people, it's probably better than ours here in the United States. Look back during the midterm elections, how much problems people have with their voting machines and entering in the wrong candidate, and the machines being outdated and all this bullshit happening. Uh, you know, Sounds a lot better, a lot sturdier than ours. But since the opposition still deems it unfair, they're now invoking Article 233 of the Constitution, saying if Maduro wasn't really elected, there's a vacuum of power that puts him in charge. So, Article 233 defines a vacuum of power as one of these things. Number one, the president's death, resignation, or impeachment. Number two, permanent physical or mental incapacity. Or number three, abandonment of post. Or number four, recall election. Maduro fits none of those definitions, but even if he did, Article 233 clearly states that if it's the vice president, not the National Assembly president, who would replace him. So their whole thing is like, no, checkmate, socialist. Check out Article 233. But Article 233 wouldn't put them in power either. So what a bunch of dipshits. They are literally just pulling shit out of their ass in hopes the Western media just parrots it enough to get U.S. boots on the ground over here. That's literally all they want to happen, folks. They want to just confuse the Western media, give us just enough excuse to go over there, get boots on the ground. But it's not fucking working. Because guess what, folks? The internet's here. And folks like me are making videos like this. So, objective failure, you bunch of assholes. Stop trying to do imperialism. Just stop it. You're being horrible folks. It says Maduro fits none of those definitions, but even if he did, blah 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 blah. I already read that. The entire thing is a concoction that's easily debunked. You hear that, David Pacman? It's a concoction that's easily debunked. Just fucking read stuff. Don't just believe what the imperialist Western media says on TV. Jesus. The urgency of regime change by Washington and Guaido is masked in the notion that Maduro's security forces are crushing dissent and wantonly executing peaceful protesters. After Guaido declared himself president, he called for huge rallies in the streets of Caracas. Hundreds of thousands, as far as the eye could see, heed the call. These happened entirely peacefully and with no government interference, like I saw firsthand in 2017. So, alright, hundreds of thousands of opposition protesters took to the streets. Where was the fucking billy clubs? Where was the crackdowns? Where was the tear gas? Where was the, rounding them up and putting them in boxcars and sending them out to concentration camps? Classic authoritarian shit. I didn't see, none of that fucking happen. But certain protests are violent, where armed wings set up flaming street barricades and confront security forces with Molotov cocktails, bombs, and guns. Between January 2nd through January 25th, 2019, 40 people had been killed. It was widely implied by the media that these protesters were all killed by Maduro's forces, or even government kill squads. The worst was from CBS News, which said, after last week's mass unrest when security forces killed more than 40 people. Okay, so they're just drumming up this narrative here. CBS referenced no evidence for this bold lie and in fact contradicted itself elsewhere, admitting the UN believes 40 died in different manners, including 12 killed by incidents related to looting. Such blatant misrepresentation of the facts come as no surprise. Here at Empire Files, we've already seen this playbook before while in Venezuela during the deadly protests in 2017, where over 140 people were killed. The majority of these deaths were caused by opposition protesters, either directly by assassinations, lynchings, and other violence, or indirectly by deadly Grambina barricades that caused many accidents. Facts like these slip through the coverage of an obedient press. The opposition against Maduro is broad and comprised of many factions, moderates, progressives, even some socialists. They oppose Maduro but respect the Constitution and democratic process. But the faction currently trying to seize power is the extreme right. With just 48 hours of declaring himself president, Guaido tried to seize Venezuela's oil production. According to S&P Global Platts, before the coup attempt began, Guaido had already drafted plans for mass privatization of oil. So we see what it's all really about, folks. It's about the oil. It's about that sweet black gold, ladies and gentlemen. Venezuela has, I think, the richest oil reserves in the world, uh, maybe only second to Saudi Arabia. And the US wants a piece of that shit. And that is really what it's all about. Before the coup even began, he was already drawing up his little scheme to sell out the resources of Venezuela that rightfully belong to the Venezuelan people, to sell them out to the big oil companies. But civil war was sadly not the worst possible scenario here. The reality of a US military attack and invasion of Venezuela is very real. Jesus, I hope not. I hope it doesn't happen. And under the pretext that the military must deliver the very same life-saving medicines that they've been blocking from the country for years. The beat of war drums is deafening. We've now learned U.S. Special Forces have been sent to Puerto Rico, the usual staging ground for U.S. invasions. The U.S. threatened the Maduro... See, it's nice to know that we can send our government special forces to Puerto Rico when we're getting ready to fucking invade Venezuela, but we can't do it when Puerto Rico gets hit by a hurricane and they really need some government aid. It's just unbelievable, man. The usual, the U.S. threatened the Maduro government with invasion and secret negotiations. And on February 18th, Trump again threatened an attack, telling Venezuelan soldiers to recognize Guaido now, or there would, quote, be no easy exit and no way out. What the fuck does that mean? No easy exit, no way out. What does that mean? Like, is he implying he's just gonna kill them all if they don't back Guaido? What the fuck, Trump, you fucking maniac? It says there's no reason to take these as empty threats. John Bolton orchestrated the most catastrophic war of my lifetime. Elliot Abrams facilitated an actual genocide in Nicaragua. And Trump is currently carpet bombing the Middle East. We know how far they're willing to go for big oil and the war machine. Potentially millions of lives are at stake. All people in the world who believe in sovereignty and peace have a role to play here and do everything in our power to stop this from happening and to shut it down if it starts. So that's it, folks. That's a great article by Abby Martin from the Empire Files. I highly recommend everybody subscribe to them, follow them, and check out the video, The Ocean of Lies. I pretty much read you the transcript, but there's some interview clips and other graphs and visual aids that will help you understand this situation. Certainly help me understand. But yeah, it's really disgusting just to see how the Western media, every single outlet, right-wing and apparently quote-unquote left-wing outlets, just supporting the imperialist U.S. war machine, falling right into John Bolton and Elliot Abrams and Donald Trump's hands. It's a real damn shame.